The young clerk's voice barely reached across the desk. "Mrs. Winslow, your son submitted paperwork last week. He stated, 'You're no longer capable of managing your finances.'" I looked up from my purse halfway through fishing out a pen. "My son?" He swallowed, nodded, then carefully slid a manila folder across the counter. Inside were 4 pages. My full name typed in bold, my date of birth, my address. The signature at the bottom looked familiar enough to sting, and next to it, my late husband's name. As a witness, Charles Winslow, dead 10 years. I started, but nothing came. My tongue felt like it was made of sand. I stared at the notary stamp. It was smudged, off-center. A copy of a letter was stapled behind it on some clinic's letterhead I'd never heard of. It claimed I was suffering from early-stage cognitive decline. There was even a phone number. He did all this without asking, without warning, without truth. Michael, the clerk, looked about 30, soft voice, clean haircut, a tie he probably adjusted too often. He sat straighter than needed, like he wasn't sure if I'd cry or collapse. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we didn't process anything. Something about the documents didn't feel right. That's why I asked you to come in." I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat there, my hands resting on the table like they didn't belong to me. "What happens if I say no?" I asked. He opened a drawer, pulled out a second folder, thicker. "These will revoke any pending authorizations and flag your account permanently. No access, no changes unless done by you in person." I took the pen from my purse and signed every line. My hand was steady, my breath was quiet. When I was done, I pushed the papers back, leaned against the chair, and looked out the window. The traffic outside moved slowly, indifferently. A bus passed by filled with school kids. I wondered if any of their mothers had ever seen their child's name next to a lie. I was still wearing the same coat when I got home. I didn't take it off, not at first. I just stood there in the kitchen, staring at the sink like I'd forgotten why I came in. The house was quiet, always was, but now it felt like something had been removed from it. Not stolen, peeled away. Michelle Winslow, 74. I write that sometimes in the margins of crossword puzzles, not because I'll forget, but because I like the sound of it. I've lived alone since Charles passed. A widow, yes, but not lonely. I still make my own soup, still volunteer at the library on Thursdays, still renew my license every few years, still remember every drug interaction from my pharmacy days and most of my neighbors' birthdays. But apparently my son believes I've lost myself. It wasn't always like this. Last Thanksgiving, Nathan carved the turkey like he was performing for a crowd. He poured me wine with both hands, exaggerated the movement, then leaned in and said, too softly for the others to hear, "You should really get your affairs in order, Mom. Just in case." Just in case. I laughed it off, called it caring, but it felt like something else. A softness wrapped around control, like a hand that squeezes just a little too long. Now I wonder how long he's been rehearsing this. Did he look at me across the Christmas table and think she won't see it coming? Did he smile while filing forms that said I was losing touch? I opened the fridge, pulled out the soup I made yesterday, lentil, heavy on garlic, and let it simmer again. Stirring helped the rhythm, the warmth, the quiet sound of a wooden spoon brushing the bottom of the pot. When the stove ticked off, I walked down the hallway and opened the drawer I had locked since Charles died. Inside was a folder labeled for emergencies, betrayal. And buried beneath a stack of old insurance papers was the first check I ever wrote to Nathan. The folder creaked open like it hadn't been touched in years, which it hadn't. I'd only glanced at it when moving things after Charles passed, too hollow then to deal with numbers or names. But now, I sat at the dining room table and pulled out every envelope, every document, every folded slip I once thought I'd never need to revisit. The first check was dated 2003. $12. Nathan needed matching socks for the football team. Charles had said no, grumbling something about character building, but Nathan came to me with those eyes, the same ones that used to cry when his toy blocks fell over. I wrote the check so I'd remember what love cost that week. There were more, 37 checks in total. Some small, $200 for textbooks, some large, $5,000 when he got laid off. I found 3 loan agreements he'd signed half-heartedly. One never returned, all of them tucked neatly into plastic sleeves like museum pieces. Then the 2017 Power of Attorney form. I remember that one. I was recovering from pneumonia and tired. Nathan had said, "It's just a backup in case something happens." He had already learned how to make caution sound like kindness. And finally at the bottom, the ledger for Nathan, not forever. My handwriting still neat then, before my hands started aching in the mornings. Each page was dated. Each entry had a note. Rent help, medical, car, gift. Car tires, therapy, divorce lawyer, moving truck. Again. $386,000, that was the sum. Not including groceries, not including forgotten $20 bills slipped into birthday cards, not including trust. I stared at the number, then walked to the kitchen and made tea. Chamomile this time. My chest felt tight, but not painful. Just full. Like something inside was expanding until it hit the walls of me. Back at the table, I flipped to a clean page in the ledger. I crossed out the old title and wrote a new one, What He Took. I hadn't even poured the tea when I heard the knock. Not the doorbell. Just 3 soft knocks, familiar and light. Sophie never used the bell. She said it always startled me, which was only half true. I opened the door, and there she was, balancing a brown paper bag in one arm and a reusable tote in the other. "Didn't mean to barge in," she said, already walking past me like she lived here. "I got yogurt, tea, and those crackers you like, the ones with the sesame." She unpacked the groceries at the kitchen counter, humming something I didn't recognize. No questions, no explanations, just presence. I sat down and waited until she looked up. "Something happened," I said. Sophie stilled. Not a twitch, not a breath, just stilled. I told her everything. The forged documents, the false letter, her father's name beside mine, written like a verdict. When I finished, her face didn't twist in confusion or doubt. It went blank, then full, all at once. "He's been acting weird," she said quietly. "He told Aunt Liza that you've been slipping, like mentally, that the bank was just helping, that someone had to step in." She didn't cry, neither did I. We just sat there across the table, 2 women in a kitchen where too much had been overheard over the years. "I told him," Sophie said, "that if anything ever happened to you, I'd take care of it. I'd take care of you." Her voice cracked. "But you don't need taking care of, Grandma. You just need to be listened to." I reached across and took her hand. Hers was warm, solid. I hadn't realized how cold mine had become until then. "I'm listening," she said again, softer this time. "Whatever you decide to do, I'll back you." I didn't answer her out loud, just stood up, walked to the hallway, and took down the business card still taped to the side of the cabinet. It was time to call Cassandra Tilley. I called Cassandra first thing the next morning. Her assistant put me through right away. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 6 years, not since Charles's estate was finalized, but her voice was exactly the same. Crisp, no nonsense, with the kind of warmth that didn't ask for permission. "Michelle," she said, surprised, "how are you?" "I need to update my estate plan," I said. A pause, then gently, "Does this involve your son?" "Yes." She didn't ask anything else, just said, "Come in this afternoon, I'll clear the hour." I arrived with a manila folder tucked under my arm. Sophie offered to drive me, but I told her no. I wanted to go alone. I needed to. Cass sat across from me, reading in silence. She didn't raise her eyebrows at the forged signature, the fake diagnosis, or the audacity of using Charles's name. When she was done, she tapped the folder once. "We'll start with revoking the 2017 power of attorney," she said. "Then I want Nathan removed from the will," I added. She nodded. "And one more thing," I said, sliding a second paper across the table. "I want to create a trust for Sophie. No one else." Cass looked up. "All of it, everything?" Her pen hovered. "You're sure?" "She's the only one who comes without asking." We worked through these documents together, line by line. When it came time to sign, Cass passed me a clean black pen. My name went down in loops and slants, firm and clear. The papers made soft, shushing sounds as we turned them one by one. I didn't cry, not even once, but when I placed the pen down for the last time, my hands felt lighter than they had in years, as if something that had been pressing on me for too long had finally shifted and left. Cass gathered the signed copies into a new envelope. "I'll file everything this week." I nodded, stood, and buttoned my coat. And when I got home, I tucked the envelope inside the old lockbox beneath my bed, right next to the deed to the house. The letter came 3 days later. Thick envelope, my name written in Nathan's slanted handwriting, the same he'd used on birthday cards when he was little. I knew what was inside before I even opened it. I could feel the performance through the paper. I made coffee first, sat at the table where the morning light fell across the wood. Then I slid a knife under the seal and unfolded 3 pages. He started with Mom, drawn out like it was still tender. He wrote that there had been a huge misunderstanding, that the documents were routine, that he was just trying to help me stay organized. He said the bank clerk must have been confused. And maybe I was too. The word confused was underlined. He wrote that he'd only wanted to make sure things were in order in case of emergency. He said I'd overreacted, that my lawyer was taking advantage of my emotional state. He even mentioned Sophie, called her impressionable, as if kindness were some kind of weakness that needed correcting. By the 2nd page, I could hear his voice, that careful tone he used when trying to make me feel silly for noticing something wrong. The same voice that once said, "You always think the worst of people, Mom." He closed with, "I'm worried about you." That was the part that made me sit back. Not angry, just hollow. Worried about me. After stealing my name. After trying to erase my choice. After convincing half the family that I'd lost my mind. I folded the letter once, then twice. My coffee had gone cold. I took the shredder from under the desk, fed each page through slowly, one by one. The sound was steady, soft. I didn't do it out of rage. I did it because the truth doesn't need to be re-explained to liars. When the last piece disappeared, I unplugged the shredder, carried the bag to the bin outside, and looked at the empty slot where the mail used to sit. The next day, I noticed the phone blinking with a new voicemail. The voicemail was from Pastor Lane. His tone was careful, the kind people use when they're not sure what truth they've been handed. "Michelle," he said, "I just wanted to check in. Nathan mentioned you've been a little forgetful lately. Maybe we could talk." Forgetful. That word sat in my ear like a stone. I called him back the next morning. "Pastor, when's your birthday?" I asked. He hesitated, then laughed softly. "August 12th. And your sermon? Last Sunday? Forgiveness and boundaries, wasn't it?" "That's right." "And the hymn you chose in April? The one everyone forgot the 2nd verse to?" He chuckled. "Amazing grace." "You remembered." "I always do," I said. He grew quiet. "I see." "I'm fine, Pastor," I added. "Truly, I never doubted it," he said. But I heard the doubt underneath. That night was the monthly potluck at the fellowship hall. I baked cornbread like I always did, the same recipe Charles loved. I told myself I wouldn't go, that I didn't owe anyone my presence, but habit is a stubborn thing. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The pause in conversation, the smile that lingered a second too long, the whisper that wasn't quite quiet enough. "She's declining fast. Poor Nathan having to handle all that paperwork." I smiled anyway. I filled a plate. I listened as Mrs. Harper spoke about her grandson's college acceptance, like nothing around us had changed. But every glance felt like a fingerprint pressing into the version of me they were building without my consent. When Pastor Lane offered grace before the meal, his voice trembled slightly. I watched heads bow and eyes flicker toward me. Afterward, as I rinsed dishes in the church kitchen, I looked at my reflection in the window above the sink. My hands were steady, my memory intact, my voice still mine. They could whisper all they wanted. I'd been silent long enough. The next morning, I called the library and booked the community room for Wednesday evening. I printed the flyers myself, just 10 of them. Black text on white paper. No images, no names, just a time, a place, and a title, a quiet retelling. 7 p.m. Wednesday. I left one at the coffee shop, one at the library desk, and gave another to Pastor Lane without explanation. He didn't ask for one. He just nodded and said he'd try to make it. That Wednesday, I arrived early. The community room smelled faintly of old books and floor polish. The folding chairs had already been set out in uneven rows. I straightened a few and laid out my notes, though I wouldn't need them. By 6:55, there were nearly 20 people. Sophie sat in the front row, arms crossed but eyes soft, and near the back, standing by the exit, in a stiff coat and tighter jaw, was Evelyn. Nathan's wife. I expected that. She always arrived without invitation, but never without an agenda. I began at exactly 7. I told them about the phone call from the bank, the forged power of attorney, the letter claiming I was unfit, the way my son used my dead husband's name like a key. I told them I didn't scream, didn't rage. I signed new papers. I revoked access. I made tea, and I made peace. Then I spoke of the lawyer, the trust, the choice to leave everything to Sophie, not out of revenge, but because she was the only one who knocked without expecting anything in return. I never raised my voice, never had to. I just told it plain, the truth doesn't need decoration. The room stayed still. People nodded. A few lowered their eyes. Evelyn didn't move. And when I finished, I folded my notes, took a sip of water, and said, "That's all." No one clapped. That would have felt wrong. Instead, a few people came forward quietly. They offered handshakes, soft thanks. Someone left 3 yellow tulips on the table without a word. As we packed up, Sophie leaned in and whispered, "You look taller tonight." And for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming of explanations. The letter came certified, in a crisp white envelope stamped with a law firm's name I didn't recognize. The tone was polite, professional, just sharp enough to leave a paper cut. Our clients, Mr. and Mrs. Nathan Hensley, wish to resolve this matter privately and with respect. They ask that you reconsider the recent estate changes in the spirit of family unity. Should you agree to restore the prior will, all pending legal inquiries will be withdrawn immediately. There it was again, unity. A word that sounds noble until you realize it means silence. I read the letter twice, then once more aloud, just to hear how hollow it sounded. They were offering peace, but only if I erased the truth. I set it down beside the cooling rack where banana bread had just finished baking. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and steady, grounding me in the life they seemed to forget I still had. I took out a sheet of plain stationery and a pen. No lawyer, no drafts, no edits. I wrote, "No, my life is not a negotiation." I folded the page once and slipped it into a blank envelope. No signature, no flourish, just tape across the flap, firm and final. Outside, the air carried a faint chill. I walked to the mailbox, slipped the envelope in, and listened as it slid into the hollow space below. A small sound, but it felt heavier than anything I'd mailed in years. Back in the kitchen, I poured myself a cup of tea and sliced into the banana bread. The first piece crumbled at the edge, imperfect, but mine. I ate it slowly, standing at the counter where Charles and I used to sit on Sunday mornings. The house was quiet, not empty, just honest. I let the quiet stay. By the time the kettle stopped whistling, Sophie's car was pulling into the driveway. Sunday morning came soft, like it always does. No calls, no letters, just the sound of birds picking at the feeder and the low hum of the world beginning again. Sophie showed up with a white paper bag in one hand and a mason jar of coffee in the other. "Still warm," she said, handing it over. "Don't make me eat them all." We sat on the porch, the air cool enough to make the rolls steam when we broke them open. Across the street, Mr. Ellery was raking leaves in slow, crooked rows. A boy zipped by on a scooter, too fast for his mother's comfort. The world kept going. For a while, we didn't say much. She sipped her coffee. I watched the wind scatter a pile of leaves into the street, like it was too proud to stay neat. "You gave him everything," Sophie said eventually, her voice quiet. Not angry, just true. I nodded, "And now I gave something to myself." She looked at me, and I saw it. Relief, maybe, or recognition. The kind of knowing that only comes when someone chooses you without hesitation. We sat there until the rolls were gone and the coffee had cooled. I didn't tell her about the final note I'd tucked inside the trust paperwork, the one she'd find one day when it mattered most. To Sophie, I'd written, "You didn't inherit my money, you inherited my boundary." She didn't need to know yet. She was already living like someone who understood it. When she left, she hugged me the same way she always had, tight, certain, no rush. I stayed on the porch a little longer, watching the street settle back into itself. The wind had changed. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. And when I stood, I did so slowly, feeling every bit of my weight, but none of it dragging. I walked back inside, closed the door behind me, and let the light spill into the front hallway, clean and golden.